Welcome to NTD News. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Here are today's top stories. Despite last-minute uncertainty in the state of Wisconsin, the presidential primary is going ahead. But officials are left wondering how many voters will come out during a pandemic. The British Prime Minister spends the night in intensive care. He was initially admitted to hospital Sunday night while suffering with virus symptoms. And we examine China's latest claim of zero death in a single day. News from inside China points to a different situation. Navy hospital ship the USNS Comfort is now taking in CCP virus patients. Earlier, the ship was to be used for non-virus patients to relieve the burden on hospitals.
President Trump gives permission to use the Navy hospital ship, the USNS Comfort, to treat CCP virus patients.
Governor Murphy and Governor Cuomo are going to be using the ship for New York, New Jersey, and it's a big ship. And it's now COVID. It's set for COVID, and we are going to, hopefully, that will be very helpful to both states.
The ship was originally set to take non-CCP virus patients in order to relieve the pressure on hospitals. Now, both the USNS Mercy docked in Los Angeles and the USNS Comforts will both take virus patients.
So both hospital ships are accepting patients, and our commitment has been that if a patient comes to us, we would take care of them. Have we had patients who ultimately were determined to have coronavirus on the hospital ships? Yes. And we're taking care of them just like we're taking care of all the other patients going forward. So.
Brigadier General Paul Fredericks also said the Department of Defense is currently helping to develop 5 different vaccine candidates, but he said there is still months of development to go.
And a crew member tested positive on board the ship. The Navy said the crew member had no contact with patients and is in isolation aboard the ship. And onshore, the pandemic is taking a physical and emotional toll on New York City's paramedics and first responders. One says he has never seen anything like this during his 17 years of service.
I don't know if any of us will ever be the same after this.
Anthony Almohera is a 17-year veteran paramedic and EMT. He says this has been one of the most devastating times in the department's history.
Most of us are pretty good about handling death. It's the nature of the job. We kind of roll with it, but nothing like this for anyone.
He says the outbreak in New York City has pushed the ambulance service to its limits. The department went from an average of 4,000 calls per day to now almost 7,000.
There's going to be a lot of trauma from this for the medics and EMTs who have seen this all, unfold, firsthand, being on the front line.
But the long hours are only part of it. Almohera explained that his colleagues are finding it hard to deal with being unable to hug and comfort people for fear of being infected.
I don't know where it's stored, but it's someplace in there, the empathy reservoir that we're able to tap into to be able to be there for people. But this is starting to empty that reservoir.
The New York Fire Department is offering some hotel rooms for first responders to help them isolate from their families. But Almohera said some of his colleagues are declining the offer, and some are sleeping in their cars to avoid passing the virus to loved ones.
The Department of Homeland Security is in the fight to combat the CCP virus crisis. Officials in various agencies across the U.S. working to bring things under control.
The Department of Homeland Security on Monday saying it has facilitated a speedy, whole-of-government response to the CCP virus. As of April 5th, FEMA has committed to spend nearly $4.1 billion on its to the hardest-hit states need trade going, with about $21 billion worth of goods exchanged between U.S.
First national test of how to manage the voting procedure amid the pandemic.
Voters in Wisconsin face a choice Tuesday of participating in a presidential primary election or staying away from large crowds during the CCP virus pandemic. Democratic Governor Tony Evers tried to postpone the election on Monday, which was quickly overruled by Wisconsin Supreme Court hours later. The court agreed with Republicans who said Evers didn't have the authority to reschedule the race on his own. The The decision leaves Wisconsin as the only state with an election scheduled in April that is proceeding as planned. One election worker said that despite protective measures in place, safety was a concern.
We're going to have masks available, gloves available, hand sanitizer, but it's still going to be something that is a risk.
Also on Monday, the Supreme Court blocked an order from a district court that would have allowed Wisconsin voters to submit absentee ballots 6 days after Election Day. The Supreme Court said allowing the order would fundamentally alter the nature of the election, also noting that election rules should not be changed on the eve of the election. The case was first filed by Democratic Party organizations, individual voters, and various liberal groups at a district court. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden already has a commanding delegate lead over rival Bernie Sanders. This Wisconsin primary result is not expected to alter either candidate's position.
Some auto insurance companies are giving money back to their customers because people are driving less during the pandemic. Allstate says it will refund about 15% of premiums paid by customers in April and May for a total of $600 million. American Family Insurance says it's giving back about $50 per car for a total of $200 million. Both insurance companies say they are expanding coverage for customers who use their own vehicles to deliver food and medicine during the virus outbreak. It's unclear if other insurers will follow suit, but Progressive says it is exploring options. And in Kansas, the U.S. Supreme Court rules that law enforcement was justified in stopping a vehicle after learning the owner's license was revoked, even though the officers didn't know who was driving.
According to court precedent under the Fourth Amendment, officers can stop someone if they have reasonable suspicion. In the 2016 case, an officer ran a background check of a pickup truck's plates even though he didn't observe any traffic violations. The driver, Charles Glover Jr., got a ticket. He claimed his Fourth Amendment rights were violated because there was no reason to suspect unlawful activity and the officers didn't know who was driving. The Kansas Supreme Court ruled in his favor, but the 8-1 Supreme Court opinion reversed that lower court opinion and only one justice dissented. The decision will give law enforcement broader latitude, but the majority of them stressed the decision has a narrow scope. They said it closely tied to Kansas law and the facts in that specific case.
The British Prime Minister has spent the night in intensive care after his virus symptoms worsened. He was initially admitted to the hospital on Sunday night. Our UK correspondent Jane Worrell has more from London.
Britain's Prime Minister spent the night in intensive care here at St Thomas's Hospital, across the river from the Houses of Parliament. It's reported he has received oxygen support but is not on a ventilator. A government spokesperson said he has been stable overnight. Johnson tested positive for the virus more than 10 days ago. He was admitted into hospital on Sunday night as a precaution and was later moved to intensive care on Monday. There's no official line of succession in the UK should the Prime Minister become incapacitated, though Johnson asked the Foreign Minister to step in and deputise where necessary.
There's an incredibly strong team spirit behind the Prime Minister and making sure that we get all of the plans that the Prime Minister has instructed us to deliver.
President Trump also expressed his support for Johnson.
Americans are all praying for his recovery. He's been a really good friend. He's been really something very special, strong, resolute, doesn't quit, doesn't give up.
Virus deaths are nearing 5,400 in the UK and 11,000 in the US. Recent data from a sample of patients admitted into intensive care in the UK shows about half survive and half don't. It comes as some British politicians have expressed anger over how the Chinese Communist Party handled the crisis. The UK Foreign Affairs Committee chair said China let disinformation spread as quickly as the virus. In his first major foreign policy decision as Prime Minister, Johnson announced Chinese tech giant Huawei, known for its close links with the CCP, would play a role in the UK's 5G network. But there's now talk that the UK government will likely rethink that decision. Politicians across the spectrum have sent to the Prime Minister well wishes as the crisis shakes the UK government at its core. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
And Cabinet Minister Michael Gove is the latest UK politician to self-isolate after his family member showed mild symptoms. Gove said he did not have symptoms himself and is working as normal. Moving now to Australia, where today the highest court overturned a sexual assault conviction against former Vatican Treasurer George Pell. The ruling allows the 78-year-old cardinal to walk free.
The highest court in Australia overturned Cardinal George Pell's convictions of child sex abuse on Tuesday. The former Vatican treasurer walked free from jail immediately. Pell is the highest-ranking member of the Catholic Church to be charged with abuse. A lower court convicted him of sexually assaulting 2 teenage choir boys in the 1990s. But in a unanimous ruling, the High Court found that the jury in Pell's trial, quote, ought to have entertained a doubt as to Cardinal Pell's guilt. The court's 7 judges ordered that the convictions be quashed and verdicts of acquittal be entered in their place, meaning the 78-year-old cannot be retried on the charges. Pell, a polarising figure in Australia for his conservative views, was sentenced to 6 years in prison for child sex offences. The plaintiff said the indecent act took place when Pell was Archbishop of Melbourne. Tuesday's ruling was one of Australia's most anticipated court decisions ever.
Coming up, months of aggressive propaganda against the U.S. from China. Now they're asking the U.S. to work with them against the virus. A Chinese defector and former diplomat taps into what could be behind the latest actions from the Chinese Communist regime. That and more after the break.
They were working on developing a coronavirus for the human host. Leads you to question, why would you be creating a coronavirus that can infect humans?
That means virus now can infect human cell much easier.
I noticed that after the outbreak, the Wuhan Institute of Virology kept strangely quiet. Who is the real boss of the P4 laboratory?
I believe they're developing them. I think they want to be the most advanced nation on Earth when it comes to biological weapons.
We want the truth.
It's time for the United States to defend itself. The real disease here is communism.
What was the Chinese Communist Party trying to hide?
The Chinese regime is reporting 0 CCP virus deaths for Monday, but evidence suggests that the outbreak is not under control there, and China may be downplaying the situation.
China reported 0 deaths yesterday. It's the first time it's done so since the beginning of the outbreak, a magnificent milestone if true. But U.S. intelligence officials recently called suspect to China's reported virus figures. Just a few days ago in China, an entire city was put under lockdown to stop the spread of the virus. Officials have not yet released details on how many there are infected. Wuhan residents, where the virus first began, are still not allowed to travel to Beijing. In fact, many neighboring provinces also won't accept them because they don't believe the outbreak is under control there. Even state media and Chinese netizens aren't making much noise about 0 deaths. It's not even a trending topic on social media. The ruling Chinese Communist Party wants people to go back to work to support the economy. It plans to lift the lockdown in the epicenter, Wuhan, on Wednesday.
After months of bashing the U.S., the Chinese regime is now calling for cooperation. A Chinese defector and former diplomat talked with NTD about the regime's two-faced diplomacy.
New York is my favorite American city. This is the first line by Chinese Ambassador Cui Tiankai in his op-ed in the New York Times published on Sunday. In contrast to aggressive accusations made earlier by Chinese officials, Cui called for China and the U.S. to cooperate against the virus. China has recently donated 1,000 ventilators to New York. 100 Chinese scholars wrote an open letter last week asking for U.S.-China to work together, saying politicized criticisms help no one. These messages of solidarity seem to contradict the regime's earlier statements. But Chen Yonglin, a Chinese defector and former Chinese diplomat, told us that this is a common tactic of the Communist Party. Chen says the Communist Party send out friendly messages not because they have changed or realized their mistakes, but to avoid retaliation for their earlier provocation.
We call it grasp with both hands. Before, when I worked for the Department of Foreign Ministry, we always used the two-handed way to deal with the U.S. Deng Xiaoping said one needs to pretend to be weak. You need to battle with the enemy, but also call for cooperation. You need to take advantage of the conflict and constantly adjust your strategy according to the situation.
The regime had propped up propaganda claiming the virus was brought to China by the U.S. military. The statement caused huge backlash from the West. President Trump used the phrase Chinese virus several times to stress the origin of the pandemic.
Sometimes the CCP feel like the situation has turned against them, so they'll then turn around and appear friendly again. They understand that right now Western countries are severely lacking in masks. If they can make these countries depend on China, this will be a chance for the regime to flip an unfavorable situation and expand their influence.
This call for cooperation has also reached experts in the U.S. Last week, nearly 100 U.S. experts, including former Obama and Bush officials, wrote an open letter calling on Trump to focus on finding the resolve to work together with China. Meanwhile, the Chinese regime has not stopped their domestic propaganda. Major Chinese news outlet Sohu posted an article on Monday claiming, although there is currently no evidence that the U.S. created and released the virus, it is only normal for people to have such suspicion. For 2 months since the outbreak started, the Chinese regime had repeatedly refused the CDC's offer to send American experts to help observe the outbreak. Last month, the Chinese regime expelled American journalists from 3 major outlets, an expert calling it one notch between closing down an embassy. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
A new report shows a popular video conferencing software is sending sensitive meeting information to servers in Beijing. An expert says this poses a significant security risk. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
Video conferencing software Zoom has seen a surge in usage during the outbreak, growing about 20 times to over 200 million daily users. Schools, big corporations, and even high-level politicians use the service. But a new report shows that Zoom sends secret encryption keys to servers in Beijing. This poses a significant security risk.
Its transmission to the server in Beijing essentially means it is within the CCP's reach, so it can be intercepted. That is to say, the CCP has the technology to intercept data and information from it.
Tong said the security flaw could enable the Chinese Communist Party to easily collect business intelligence. The regime can learn about the high-level operations in big corporations and their strategic decisions. It can then be a step ahead of the competition. The research also found that most of Zoom's research and development staff are in China. Tong says this makes the company susceptible to infiltration by the CCP.
Even if the company itself is good, it may be innocent, but once it's established in China, it will have a presence there. Then, particularly if it has commercial or technological capabilities that the CCP needs, the CCP will certainly not let it go.
Tong says having a company in China means you have to play by the party's rules, and the regime has many ways to infiltrate.
One of the most common means is sending government-controlled persons to work in the company. Buying them out also happens.
The Chinese regime can also threaten the company's bottom line. If the company doesn't obey the party, authorities could make things difficult for them. Zoom's founder, Eric Yuan, is originally from China, and Tong says national ties also makes him vulnerable to pressure from the Chinese regime. The New York Department of Education and Elon Musk's SpaceX have banned Zoom over privacy concerns. Juliet Song, NTD News, New York.
Coming up, the European Union struggles to help members hurting financially amid the CCP virus pandemic. Support grows for CORONABONDS. More on that after the break.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
U.S. prosecutors on Monday announced new criminal charges against two former executives of 21st Century Fox and others. This stems from a long-running investigation of corruption surrounding FIFA, soccer's world governing body. The former Fox executives, Hernan Lopez and Carlos Martinez, were indicted in Brooklyn federal court on wire fraud and money laundering charges. Also indicted was Gerard Romy, former co-chief executive of Spanish media company Imagina Media Audiovisual SL and Full Play Group SA, a Uruguayan sports marketing company. The U.S. investigation into corruption in the world of soccer became public in 2015 with the announcement of criminal charges against a slew of officials and others. Prosecutors said for the first time in Monday's indictment that FIFA officials took bribes in connection with choosing Qatar and Russia to host the 2018 and 2022 World Cups, respectively. And European Union finance ministers are struggling with how to help the members most affected by the CCP virus. The key question hinges on mutualization of debt. NTD's Germany correspondent Christian Watson has more.
European Union finance ministers on Tuesday debating how to aid poorer states buckling under the CCP virus crisis and how to cushion the economic fallout.
We have an unprecedented crisis which we have never faced in the history of the European Union. If anything wrong happens to Italy in sense of economy or politics, then the entire bloc of the euro area would be put in danger.
Italy and other southern states that are especially hard hit demand more solidarity. They want the bloc to issue so-called CORONABONDS. That would mean the sharing of debt and hence lower borrowing costs for more indebted countries.
The problem is that the politicians from the northern countries are reluctant to take more guarantees, to take more risk for the southern countries.
They say the EU's instruments are sufficient. The southern states, though, are opposed to any strings and stigma that are usually attached. It's an old divide in Europe, but unlike during the last crisis 10 years ago, today support for CORONABONDS is growing among leading economists and even members of the European Central Bank.
Every crisis shows that the instruments that we have had are not enough, that we have to go one step further and adopt new instruments.
Officials have until April 9th to design a rescue package and bridge those divisions. Reporting by Christian Watson, NTD News, Berlin.
Coming up in some lighter news, a celebration of life. A baby elephant is born and a baby rhino takes its first mud bath. See them in action when we return. Little Caesars is donating 1 million pizzas to first responders in the next few weeks as the virus pandemic continues. The pizza chain says pies will be donated to hospitals, police departments, and fire departments. The give back kicks off Tuesday at the Detroit Medical Center in the company's hometown. Little Caesars says these donations could serve up to 4 million meals. And starting next Monday, customers can also get in on the action. When they use the Little Caesars app or order online, they have the option to pie it forward and donate a pizza to a nearby hospital or first responders. And that's all for now. Thanks for tuning in. Join us again tonight at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Tiffany Meyer.